guys, I'm here to talk to you about secondary sources, and we will be using primary and secondary sources in the response essay and probably in all the other essays coming up, the report and then the argument. But in the response essay, the primary source, as you know, is the essay you've chosen to analyze, react to, evaluate, whichever verb fits your particular way of discussing the essay in the textbook. That will be your primary source, the textbook source. And then the secondary source is something you're going to find that's extra information about something that's happening in your primary source. So let's talk for a few minutes first about the kind of source that you'll likely find. So for the response essay assignment, I sort of expect that everyone will just find a source on the internet using whatever search engine you choose to utilize. I usually use Google, but I know other people like other search engines, so it doesn't really matter the way in which you find your source. I think I'm saying all this because, as I've expressed in class, for this particular assignment, we're not going to focus on evaluating sources for accurate information or even academic appropriateness. For now, I want to just focus on how do we find a source and how do I use that source and integrate it very tightly into my essay. There's so many things to think about when you're researching and so many things to think about when you're finding sources that I'm choosing as the instructor of this course to make sure that we're just learning a little bit of information at a time. And I find actually that the hardest thing for learning writers to do is to find a way to fit the source in to the essay so that it's totally integrated. And so that's my goal, is to teach that during the response essay. But of course we have to find the sources, so I'll talk a little bit about what will be like for you to find your source. So let's assume you're using Google, but any other search engine will do, as I've said. You're going to do your search by doing a keyword search. So the thing we'll talk about in a minute is, so what kind of information can we find or should we find for this secondary source that's required in the response essay? So you're going to do a keyword search once you determine what you want to look for. A single word, a short phrase. And then based on that, you're going to have to wade through probably, I would say 2 to 3 of the results page that the search engine provides for you. I wouldn't just look at the first 3 sources that the search engine lists at the top of the first results page. I would scroll down and look for a few different ones. Remember, we're not worrying about the quality of the source. I think a better thing to evaluate as you're looking for your source is, will this information fit with what I'm saying about the source that I'm evaluating? Will this source fit with the way I'm reacting to the source that I'm using to respond in this essay? So that's going to be the thing to sort of align, is to make sure whatever you're saying fits with the source that you find, so that you don't have this really hard time of making everything fit together. So I need to get my glasses on because I've made a list of possible secondary sources. And what I'm doing is listing general things that you might look for. So the first thing I'm going to mention to you, and I'm trying to find our Inked Well essay that we've been working with in class. The first thing I want to mention to you, and I'm going to hold up the textbook, is that for every source that we're using for the primary source, for this assignment, you'll notice that there are 2 paragraphs of information, some information about the author, where the source was originally published, maybe some other information if the author has published often on the same topic. You'll find some information here. And then there's also some background information on the topic itself. So I mentioned this information that's given by the textbook editors prior to the essay we've been analyzing to see how it's a response essay. I mentioned these 2 paragraphs because you might use the textbook introductions to the essays as your secondary source. And so if that feels like a good idea to you, feel free to do that. You won't have to find a source on the internet at all. What I want to point out very quickly about these 2 paragraphs is that they're doing the very same thing that I'm asking you to do in identifying a secondary source, which is giving background information. This is one kind of information that you could include in your essay. through the use of a secondary source. And you'll notice that it's about the author, that it's about the kinds of things he's written. And then the second paragraph on page 692, I'm still looking at 692, talks about the topic. So you could even do some research on the topic that your primary source is about. If you're doing the coffee essay by Stanley Fish, you could look for some information about coffee shops these days, or anything that relates to what he's talking about in that essay. If you're doing the gun essay by Hasselstrom, you can look up information about women owning and carrying guns, using guns for protection. So you can research those topics yourself and incorporate any information that you think fits with the way that you are reacting to the source. So I would look to page 692. This is the essay we've been using to analyze what a response essay is and how it works. And I would look to those two introduction paragraphs to get some ideas for what kind of secondary source information you might find. But now just a quick list, and I have a little post-it to kind of go over. So get some context, get some background information on the author, on the topic itself. You might even try to find a source that gives an alternative point of view on the topic. For instance, I had a student talk to me the other night. He's writing his response essay on Stanley Fish's coffee essay, and he said he wants to go out and find someone saying that today's coffee houses are better than the old way of getting coffee, so that he has something to kind of counter what Fish said about it. You could also, and this is totally new, a new category, you guys remember that some of us were coming up with ideas for our body paragraphs about looking at the author's tone, or looking at the author's beginning or ending, or looking at the author's use of a pattern of writing like exemplification or narration or argumentation, whatever you're able to observe in the body of the essay. But you could go find a source that defines what that kind of writing is, or defines what an effective introduction is, and then you could use that source within your body paragraph where you're looking at whatever part of the piece of the part of the essay that you're reacting to. So I think I've given you about as many ideas as I can in a general sense. I'll give you a few specific ideas, but remember, the point of the secondary source really is to include information that helps us to learn more about the object of your response, which is the source from the textbook. So I'll just say in general that it doesn't matter what kind of information you find. What matters is that you're able to integrate it very tightly into your response essay, and not have a source of information that you're looking at going, I really don't know how this relates to anything that I've said. So it might help you to kind of identify what you want to write about in the body paragraphs, and then go seek information related to what you've decided to react to. That way you already in your mind have some ideas about where the source would fit. If I'm using my body paragraph topics as sort of the starting place for me to figure out what secondary source I'm looking for, I'm also already deciding that I know they can fit in the body paragraphs. But of course, we talked in class about secondary sources can go in the intro, can go in the conclusion. So you might, again, just find some general information about the author, what he's written. You might find some general information about the source of the original publication. You might even have something to say about that, because the original publication has a particular audience, and that might give you some insight into why then did the author write this particular way, which might relate to something you're critiquing, right? I didn't like this particular thing, but now I understand that the original audience who was intended to read this probably did. So it gives you some insight into the way the piece was written. All right, I think that's all I have for today. If you guys have questions about secondary sources, don't forget that I will show up to Thursday's online chat. Of course, you can email me as well, and we will talk more about secondary sources in class. Have a good one, guys.